What is going on, YouTube? What is going on, Kansas City? And what is going on, everybody? And welcome to the Beat of KC. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not recognize the face to, well, how I'm looking at it, to my left, John Kurtz, ladies and gentlemen. This is absolutely incredible. I'm telling you, you've been dominating the YouTube stratosphere. You've been killing it when it comes to this conference realignment. We're going to tell everybody watching right now a little bit of your credentials. Sports director at 1350 K-Man. John also is on the game, which can be heard on K-Man. It's going to be on weekdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Also does Power Cat Game Day. Like I said, that does the YouTube, which, holy smokes, that thing is on fire. I was watching it and I had to step back a little bit because I was feeling the heat. KC Sports Network and also on Kansas State Sports. How's it going, man? Holy smokes, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a lot. It keeps me busy, and what's crazy is like the last 3 weeks were supposed to be like the end of chill time, right? Like the summer is the time where you kind of get everything in and get all your rest, your R&R in before football season comes around, and now it's like this has been as busy as football season typically is. So like, man, if we're going to have realignment on top of football season, it's going to be wild, but it is all fun. It's very entertaining. So I'm here for it. It's been a good busy.
That's what's up. Well, first of all, I do want to thank you for coming on, giving me the opportunity, because I know how busy you're going to be and going into it. So I appreciate your time. Before I start hammering you with some questions, if you don't mind giving everybody where they can find you on Twitter and anything that I missed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that a lot. So first of all, definitely YouTube channel. Just search my name, John Kurtz, Kurtz. And then on Twitter, it's just JL Kurtz, JLKURTZ. And I'm on Twitter way too much. So you'll definitely see some action from me on Twitter. If you want to find my daily radio show, just search the Game KMAN wherever you're getting podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Whatever's easiest for you, you can find it there. And then if you're a K-State fan, specifically the Lock It Up with Kurtz podcast is on the KC Sports Network. The guys at Let It Fly Media, man, they do incredible work. And I've been really, really privileged to be a part of that. We just dropped an episode here 2 days ago. I guess it's been by this point. So yeah, lots of ways to get plenty of contacts or content from me and get in contact with me.
That's awesome. Well, I'm ready to get into this if you are.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All righty. So my first question, and like I said, I usually free fly these. I mean, these are usually, but I had to narrow in today for you. So my first question really is, what was your reaction on the initial report that came out on Texas and Oklahoma? Like, what was your individual, like, shock and awe moment, I guess you could say? And then, and the reason I'm asking that is because I went back and listened to the interview you had with Robert Allen. And basically you posted it 3 days ago. It's on your YouTube. And it can be found under the Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, how it got started, basically, is what the title is. I was listening to Robert Allen and going back and kind of hearing him and then kind of rewinding, I guess. What were your thoughts on just that whole entire situation?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's one of those moments I won't really ever forget. There have been a handful of those. Like in my career, I've been covering K-State in the Big 12 for 10 years now. I can remember like being at the Big 12 tournament the day that everything went crazy with COVID. That's like the last, like, hey, I remember where I was when. This is the next thing in line, I think, for me, because so I'm pulling in, that report came out at like, it was around 2:30 on Wednesday, and I'm pulling into work. I usually get into the office. I've been working from home until about 3. I get in the office at 3, do the show at 4. So I'm pulling in, and I haven't been on my phone for the last half hour or so, just haven't been paying attention because I'm getting ready, showering up, getting ready to go in, right? So I roll into work, I get in the parking lot, I look at my phone, and I've got a group text going that's from people who don't typically talk sports with me. So I'm like surprised when I see that it says from Andy, and it's like, hey, Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. And it was like, hey, bleep these guys. Like, what are they doing? And I was like, what, are you kidding me? Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. And so, I took all these notes, everything I had for my show that day, and just threw it away. I mean, because that became the conversation. It still is going, everything that's transpired after that. So I didn't even really have time to really process it, other than just the shock of like, okay, well, this is a credible reporter in the Houston Chronicle. Like, this seems like it's something that's legitimate. and you just go with it. You're like, man, this is a massive story. Like I can remember just coming in and telling my producer, like, I mean, this is going to be the show today. And he was kind of like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And we were both sort of just like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's it, right? Like we can't talk anything else. And then once you started getting into it, you're like, okay, yeah, this is going to be bad.
Yeah.
So it's been crazy. I think, look, it's not, ultimately it's not surprising that Texas and Oklahoma are not going to be on board beyond 2025. Like if you would have told me the day before it happened or asked me, what are the odds that Texas and Oklahoma re-up the grant of rights? I probably would have said 50-50 at best. Like there's a definite chance that's not going to happen, but it was just the timing of it all because you figured it was at least another year or two down the road. Yeah. And I had just been 6 days before I was in Arlington at Big 12 Media Days at Jerry World, and Bob Bowlesby got up there on a podium and said, conference realignment doesn't keep me up at night. He's doing all these Radio Row interviews where he was going in even more on that. And so you just, nobody was talking about it. Nobody, not a soul. And that's one of the wildest things of the whole process is that Texas, look, in Austin, they have a lot of really dogged reporters. Like they have guys that go and get it. And you have a lot of loose lips at Texas because there's so many boosters involved, guys that want to feel important, and they will talk. So like the fact that they kept this under wraps and nobody had any idea 6 days before is just mind blowing to me. And, you know, it's just, there's a lot of anger at Texas. There's some frustration, I think, with Oklahoma, but ultimately I understand why they're doing it. It just sucks for the rest of us 8 that are left here. And there's not much of a voice on the national scene for the other 8. So that's a part of why I've just been yelling as loud as I have on YouTube, because it's like nobody out there really seems to want to stick up for him. So that's a pretty good synopsis, I think, of where I'm kind of at with everything.
Most definitely, you know, and that's, I mean, I've definitely kind of, what's been nice is going back and watching your videos and getting like your raw emotion from it, because you are, you know, you have interviewed people from the show and put those in there, but like you're getting your raw emotion in this. And like you always say in your open, you know, I'm here for the Big 12. I'm trying to be that voice. And I think that's good. And that's what's kind of like it leads me to the next question, because obviously the speculation has been swirling, and it does make it fun because, you know, your teams get tied to what could be the Big 10 or the Pac-12 or the ACC. So there's some excitement to it, but in all honesty, there's some kind of on edginess as well, because you're like, well, does this actually happen? And, you know, some of the teams like KU and K-State, in all honesty, that is a rivalry. Like we have that rivalry. I don't want that to get broke up. I mean, we have, you know, that's a true, like, you know, we get excited when we play each other, no matter what it is. And I don't want that to get broke up. So that kind of leads me to, you know, the Pac-12, the Big 10, and the ACC, who goes where and if first. So basically, like, which team from our current situation of the 8 could potentially force the hand? Which team do you feel could force the hand and really kind of cause the cards to start to tumble?
Yeah, well, you're definitely right that like a team or two leaving is going to really incite a lot of panic and probably be the end of it. I mean, I think it's 8 together or none together, basically at this point. But the tough thing is for the 8 schools, I've felt like this the whole time and have said this the whole time. It does not seem likely to me that anybody's getting an invite anytime soon, unless another domino falls somewhere else that changes things, because none of these schools have a good case to tangibly say that they add legitimate monetary value to a conference. And that's what this is all about now. Like, do you increase our payout per school because it's such an arms race? And so, for instance, Kansas in the Big 10, there was a great breakdown by, I think it was Stuart Mandel. It was one of the writers at The Athletic who said, look, okay, the Big 12 TV deal is worth this. If you take half of that, which is Texas and Oklahoma, out of it, then it's worth this. It's 80-20 football, basketball. So 20% is basketball. So now we're at this number, and that was $25 million. And so the idea there is, even if you give Kansas all of that, you say all of the value in Big 12 basketball is Kansas basketball, that's $25 million. That's half of the payout per year per team for a school in the Big 10. So if you bring in Kansas, you're only making 25. Now you got to cut somebody else a slice of the pie. Everybody's losing money. Yeah. So like that's the general idea here, and just the tough luck economics of it, I think, for everybody. And I already felt that way, and then that got strengthened by the news that came out on Friday night, which has sent everybody else in the Big 12 in a panic, I think, because now you find out that according to The Athletic and Max Olson, that the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big Ten are all working together in an alliance, which is going to be somewhat revolved around scheduling. But I think the real idea here is that they can have voting power. They would have 41 votes to the 16 of the SEC. They can have voting power against Greg Sankey on tournament expansion, college football playoff expansion, governance, like wherever it is that we're going, which I think there is a lot of change still to come, especially when you talk about the governance of the NCAA or lack thereof. That's what they want. They want strength in numbers against the SEC, and it's all about a power play there. And if the Big 12 is being left out, I mean, it reinforces these guys, all these other leagues have bigger fish to fry right now than worrying about Kansas or Kansas State or Texas Tech or whoever. And that's just the harsh reality. So, the logical tie-ins, if you wanted to say like who has a case somewhere, Kansas has a case on down the line potentially for the Big Ten if they decide that's a route they want to go, just because they have a national brand in hoops, they have an AAU status, which basically just means you're a prestigious academic university. Although, look, I'm a K-State guy. If you want to break it down, it's like Kansas is like number 123, K-State's number 170 something. I mean, it's not, we could break down the details of that. But Kansas and Iowa State have at least a case because they're AAU schools to the Big Ten. Texas Tech, I think, has a case to the Pac-12 because they're the biggest school left in Texas, and the prize there would be getting into the Texas market, getting into the Central Time Zone. West Virginia makes some sense with the ACC just because of geography. But again, I don't think that's a done deal. And then you're left like TCU, Baylor, maybe the Pac-12. They've been working together with Texas Tech, but they're small religious schools, and that doesn't really jive with the culture of the Pac-12 and what their university presidents want. So that's always thought to be a sticking point. And then K-State, I mean, like you hope, it seems like the only hope there would be like maybe you find a way to work in with Texas Tech and Oklahoma State to get out to the Pac-12 if something were to happen. But fortunately, it does not seem like there are a lot of good options. Like the Big Ten would make more sense geographically, but you're not an AAU school. So it's just not a great situation for anybody, long story short. And I think trying to predict like which of those would be the first to fall, if one does fall, is just kind of a fool's errand. I don't think you can do it.
Yeah, I mean, behind the scenes, you would have to think that they are like at least entertaining, from an individual standpoint, like what is going to happen. I mean, this has to be because, we keep hearing news that's like, oh, we've been in discussions for weeks. I mean, specifically even Friday's news, even in your video, you talked about how they had been in talks for weeks, and it kind of caught us off guard because it's like, man, this is going. And so I would have to assume that some of these schools, the moment that news broke, they had already been kind of alerted what was going to be going on. I just have to think that was happening because of how much, we're finding out later on that it's been in weeks or it's been in doing this. And so, I just kind of am curious to think like, should KU in just their situation, should they have been taking football way more seriously, knowing that at some point this was going to happen? And I mean, in all honesty, we're seeing that football is like the be all, basically. I mean, that's what's deciding this in the big scheme of things. Like football is the powerhouse. So, I mean, that's kind of what's shooting them in the foot, theoretically, because their football team has been one of the worst in the Power Five. Like, do you think that, just that being said, they should have been looking more at ways of making it better and getting it to a point where it's at least something that is of interest to another conference?
Well, man, I love this question. Now, Lucas, keep in mind, again, I am a K-State grad. My grandfather was a teacher at K-State. My father went to school at K-State. I've been coming to football games since I was a little kid. So I'm just giving you the lens that you're going to get this answer through. But I do think KU is still in some trouble. I don't think that basketball brand is going to be valuable enough on its own. 10 years ago, I think this was a much different conversation, because 10 years ago, you were coming off a 4-year stretch where KU had averaged 8 wins per season and had the Orange Bowl wrapped up in there because of Mark Mangino, a Bill Snyder disciple who took over that program and had me legitimately scared. You could trace this all the way back to like Lou Perkins, who was the AD at the time, firing Mangino, and that being the crux of why Kansas is in a tougher position right now. Because if they had that football program now, I think this would be an entirely different discussion for Kansas. They could potentially be adding some value. But I think the issue with Kansas is just that there's always been this, it's just kind of a hubris, like a pompous attitude about, like, I mean, look, you just run through the hires, man. Like Charlie Weiss.
Mm-hmm.
Look, Kansas has just always been style over substance. Maybe that's a more PC way of putting this,
Yeah.
but they've always been more style over substance. And so it's just led to a lot of bad hires. I mean, I think Turner Gill was at least like, I mean, look, they just hired a guy from Buffalo, right? And that's being praised. Turner Gill came from Buffalo, and that didn't work out. I think that was just a mistake because he was too green, but it's not like a hubris mistake. That was just a mistake. Charlie Weiss I mean, that is so Kansas to go try and get Charlie Weiss in there. And obviously that was a disaster. And then, they kind of went back to the overmatched guy in David Beatty. That's sort of along the lines of Turner Gill, where you're probably trying too hard there and getting somebody who's over their head. And then you come back with the hubris hire again. And that's all like, look, Jeff Long. I mean, as a K-State fan, the saddest thing that's happened in the last sports calendar year, even setting realignment aside, is the fact that Jeff Long and Les Miles got fired and run out of Kansas, because I would have loved to have seen those guys stay there for 100 years. They could have stayed there as long as possible, because I just think they were buffoons. And that was, again, such a Kansas style over substance kind of a thing to hire them. So I think it's just been the general attitude of Kansas, like, hey, we can go get the style. We need a name because we are Kansas. I think that's what's gotten them in trouble and kind of led them into this position that they're in right now.
For sure. And, that's why I think, because that's where, like, I try to replicate, or at least have a similarity to what's K-State's doing with their football program. And that's why I think, at least to some degree, K-State could be an attractive, ad, just because they have shown success in ways to draw those kids from Kansas and be able to recruit. And it's just like they've had those flashes in a pan where they could go and do something. I mean, I try to think of it that way. And it's like, man, we have the attractive basketball program, but in the grand scheme of things, again, it's all about football. And that's why I think, as just a fan base, it's almost like I would like to see these teams stay together. I would like to see the 8 stay together. And if that does happen, what are your thoughts on, do you think they go out and attract more teams to come and try to create another, I guess, big time conference? Or do you think that they just try to keep this thing together with duct tape and survive and do what they can?
It's going to be really interesting, because I think the obviously expansion would come into play there at some point. But right now, like I was just reading, and it's what my next YouTube video is going to be about. It was a story from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal where they talked to Kirby Hocutt, who's the Texas Tech AD. And, his response basically was like, this is not good. He was honest. And he was like, yeah, of course I don't like hearing that. It's not good that we were left out of this, but we're not going to stop trying to sell Texas Tech. We're not going to stop trying to find the best case scenario here. And I'm not going to give up on some kind of alliance working out between the Pac-12 and the Big 12 eventually. And I think that's the way you do have to approach it if you're the conference. Like, I don't think you can panic and just say, well, this is over. It's never happening with the Pac-12. There's so much, it's realignment, man. Like, there are no rules in conference realignment. So anything can happen. You're talking about an alliance between 3 leagues where there's 41 egos and schools that have to mesh together. That could break down at some point. I just think there are a lot of reasons to keep your head in that game if you are the Big 12. But if that's truly not going to work out, then yes, you definitely start turning toward expansion candidates. And to me, at that point, you're just trying to pick schools that have the most potential to turn themselves into something. Mm-hmm. Like TCU. I mean, TCU, now they were a great program at the level that they were at in the Mountain West when they came in. But they've been able to sustain that and get better as a program and use Power 5 resources to propel them to darn near the college football playoff in 2014. So they've shown that you can do that and grow yourself and become stronger. And you're looking for candidates there to hopefully 10 years down the road, when you're looking at the next TV contract, now you have some more attractive schools in there, whether it's Houston, Central Florida, South Florida, Cincinnati, which I think these are all the options that would be basically on the table. Maybe the Big 12 is desperate enough to go get BYU right now. Back in 2016, there were the LGBTQ concerns that came into play there. Desperation, desperate times, desperate measures. I don't know how much that changes the calculus there. But if you can go get schools like that have potential to grow with some Power 5 money, then maybe that you're more attractive by the time the next TV contract comes around. And that's what you have to start looking at. But there's no question that money-wise, financially, the best case scenario is eventually merging with the Pac-12. I mean, I think there's no way around that. Or one of these other schools, if they're going to get a life raft to some other major conference, that's going to net you a lot more money overall for your athletic department. But you can try and do some damage control by picking the right schools to add, and hopefully the dynamics of everything change for the next TV contract.
For sure, for sure. I mean, that kind of leads me to this next piece too, because we did hear that news that came out Friday, and kind of what you're saying is that could be the way to go is the Pac-12 for, some of these remaining 8 schools. Do you envision that eventually what we're going to start to see are like pods, not obviously divisions within a conference? Because if all of those schools go together, so let's say, I guess the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 all go together and they just encompass or engulf basically the remaining 8. Do you think that they're going to eventually, because they're saying alliance? I don't think when you say alliance, that's a big word. And that has some pretty bold meaning to it. Like, you're just not going to align a schedule. I think at some point you're going to really look to create an alliance. And so would you think that they would ideally just create pods within these divisions, I guess you could say, that ultimately would produce a winner? They would play each other, and then they would ideally send out a representation to the national championship, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really hard to predict all that right now because we just don't. This is so much in its infancy of, I'm not even sure that, George Kliakov, who's the Pac-12 commissioner, he was quoted in that same story that Max Olson wrote in The Athletic, basically saying like, there's no news really to report here. Now, obviously they're going to try and downplay it, I think, from their end, but I'm not sure that they even know, I guess is the point. Like how far, how cohesive of an alliance is this going to be? Like, what is the end goal with this? I would think that would really have to be planned, and maybe eventually you do get to that kind of point. But we're seeing, like, I mean, the pods can make some of this work if you're going to have a bigger league. I mean, we're already seeing the SEC talk about it. With Texas and Oklahoma coming in there, you have your 14 pods, and you can do the scheduling that way and keep some regional rivalries and that sort of thing. So there are definitely ways to work it out. I think it's like where there's a will, there's a way. Like if the money is going to talk for all 3 leagues to be aligned together and they need to figure something else out besides just keeping their own conferences right now, they'll do it. Anything that, like, if the rule of thumb was like, well, it has to make sense geographically and culturally and all these things, all that's been thrown out the window, man. I mean, we've got West Virginia flying all over, thousands. They spend $6+ million a year on travel for all their sports in the Big 12. Like, it's that stuff's been long gone. So they would figure something out if they needed to. Yeah,
for sure. And that kind of leads me to this next one too, because with that being said, if they're talking in that manner, which conference do you feel is the most desperate outside of the Big 12, I guess you could say? Like, is there a conference that you would consider that is desperate to really try to stay on the level of the SEC, or is it kind of that across the board?
Yeah, it's definitely the Pac-12, and that's what makes this alliance interesting to me, because the Pac-12 is basically in that relationship in the same place that the Big 12 is in, trying to court the Pac-12. Like the Big 12 needs the Pac-12 more than the Pac-12 needs the Big 12. Although the Pac-12 has not really been in the greatest standing themselves, so you could argue some strength in numbers, getting into Central Time Zone, getting into Texas. Like, there are some definite plays there, and that's what the Big 12 is trying to leverage. But on the other side, that's what surprises me a bit about the Big Ten and the ACC, that they feel like that is something beneficial to them. But it probably does just reinforce to you how much fear there is of the SEC and the power that Greg Sankey, the commissioner there, is accumulating, because they just feel like, hey, we just need as many votes as we can to be able to blockade whatever it is that we can. And the Pac-12, at least right now, is still standing, whereas the Big 12 is kind of not. I mean, they've been sort of knocked down. They're on the mat about at the 7 or the 8 count right now. So it's definitely the Pac-12, but we'll see how long that continues to last, because another thing's been talked about, like, does the Big Ten try to go get USC? Do they try and splinter off, like siphon off 4 Pac-12 teams? Still think that could be something that comes down the line. We'll see what USC tries to think here. So it may even be something where they align at first, and then there's going to be some cannibalism and the Big Ten goes after somebody. I wouldn't be feeling totally solidified if I were the Pac-12 right now, even after the alliance, just because they've had their own struggles financially, leadership-wise. Their old commissioner, Larry Scott, much maligned. He's now out of there. USC's threatened to go independent before. I mean, so they have some issues in their own house to take care of.
For sure, for sure. Well, that leads me to this next piece. Do you think the SEC is done?
Whew, that's a really good question. I would say they're not done trying. And I think the next logical step for the SEC is to go after Clemson and Florida State in the ACC. But there's a lot of complications with that. The ACC's grant of rights it's like 10 years longer than the Big 12. It's through, I believe, 2035 or maybe even 2036. They got locked into a pretty bad contract with this ACC network. It's kind of just an old contract that they paid too much for that now they're stuck in, and it's going to put them behind the Big 12 and the SEC when it comes to revenue here in the coming years. So I don't know how that would work out as far as trying to get them there. It might be pretty messy, but I think what the SEC has proven here is like there's some silent killers, man. I mean, real gangsters move in silence, right? And that's what the SEC did with Texas and Oklahoma. So I don't think anybody trusts them to be done, and I think everybody feels like they're going to be aggressive and try and push this as much as they can. So I don't know if they'll be able to pull it off, but I certainly don't think they're done trying.
Do you think outside of Clemson and Florida State, there's any other truly like attractive pieces that they could add?
You know, about the only other thing is, I mentioned USC, and I don't know how, I don't know if they would want USC, UCLA, if they would want to throw in Oregon, Washington with that, if that adds value. But it's really like USC is the one big prize on the West Coast, Clemson, and to a lesser extent, Florida State down in their neck of the woods. And then outside of that, like, I mean, I guess Notre Dame, everyone talks about Notre Dame with the Big Ten and the ACC. I don't know what a weird pairing that would be, Notre Dame and the SEC. And Notre Dame really doesn't need a conference right now with how the 12-team playoff, it appears, is going to be constituted. So doubt that happens, but those are really the prizes left. It's like Clemson, USC, Notre Dame. And if we're talking about big entities that legitimately bring in money, those are the three that are left on the board.
Yeah. And I always think it's interesting to see like Notre Dame, because it's almost like they've been kind of tossed around there at times because they just haven't had a conference, and then they were aligned for a little bit, and just in certain sports, it just, I don't know, it just seems kind of weird, like why someone wouldn't want to just go grab them and maybe potentially throw them in there. But yeah, I was curious to see if they would continue to be aggressive and go try to get somebody else or something else as well. That leads me to this next one. And, I was curious because I've heard your talks about, the KU and going to the Big Ten and some of these other rumors like TCU, what was going on with, them going to the Pac-12. I heard your interview with David Smoke, who I absolutely enjoy listening to, from talking about Baylor down there. And I was kind of curious because with all this, going on, do you think this impacts recruiting with really kind of the unknown? Like not knowing if they're going to be in a Big 8 conference, or if they end up going to the Pac-12, or if they go to the Pac or Big 10. Do you think that there's just kind of like a potential it could impact some of the recruiting aspect?
100%. And I've got that on a list of content ideas here coming up this week for the show and the YouTube channel. I think I can speak to the K-State side of things. I mean, so they had, I get, maybe this isn't totally fair to blame on conference realignment, but they had a kid, Charles Nimrod, who's from Arkansas. He did have an Arkansas offer. The thought behind the scenes was he had basically already committed to K-State. This is going back like a month and a half. And he was waiting to announce it just until his birthday, which I think it was going to be right around now. It was like mid-August or something. And then he winds up, after the conference realignment news breaks, he winds up announcing he'll push the decision date back. And then lo and behold, he did kind of blow up. He got a Tennessee offer and now he's committed to Tennessee. You saw that there. K-State had another kid, and I'm spacing on his name, that just committed to Arkansas, actually, here within the last 2 days and 48 hours. And that was somebody they thought recruiting experts around here would tell you like K-State had a lead for and was feeling pretty good about. And now all of a sudden goes to the SEC. So like, I think it 100% will have an impact. There was think it was an athletic story, maybe CBS Sports. One of the reports, all this stuff runs together here in the last few weeks, but one of them did quote a coach as saying we're getting killed right now on the recruiting trail by it. It was an anonymous coach. They didn't have it attributed to which coach, but like, of course it's like recruiting is, you talk about like no rules in conference realignment. I mean, there's really, I guess there technically are rules in recruiting, but there's no real bounds to stop anybody from doing anything on the negative recruiting front. And that's your pitch, man. Like everybody's trying to feed families, advance in their careers. It's cutthroat. Of course, they're going to be selling that. And I think it definitely hurts. And that's you talk about the financial impact of sticking around in the Big 12 to make sure that Texas and Oklahoma have to pay up. There are some things that go along with that will make it a struggle too. And one of those is, there will always be this aura of uncertainty hanging over you as like, what's going to happen? I think it will absolutely make a difference in recruiting. And now talking about, does this become a self-fulfilling prophecy where like ESPN they have financial incentive to see the Big 12 implode. Now the value of the schools that are left will be lesser because they'll be bringing in less talent. They won't win as much. Like you can see how all of that would come down the road. And so do not envy the coaches, do not envy the recruiting coordinators, do not envy anybody that's having to put up with that right now.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like absolute chaos. And then I started thinking too of how significant the recruiting or the transfer portal is going to be. I mean, that is almost going to be as big as anything because, when that time does really kind of crack and, you start to see some movements going on, that could be an attractive piece because if K-State is in the Pac-12, I think, there might be more kids that would want to go play in that environment against those types of schools on a regular basis versus being stuck in playing in, we'll say KU, for example, who we'll just say is stuck in the big 8 and is still playing against some of those other schools. I think, and that's always been a topic that I've talked about is if KU were to go to the Big 10, I think that attracts a lot more if that just happens from a football standpoint, even because the players are going to be like, hey, I'm playing in the Big 10. And I think from a fan base too, that will increase attendance. Like for me, if I know Ohio State is going to be in Memorial Stadium playing, is there a chance that we're going to get beat 70-0? Yeah. But I'm going to be able to say that I've seen Ohio State play in person. And I think, taking that into consideration for some things too. And I think, even from a basketball standpoint, you got Michigan State coming in and, we've kind of had a little bit of a back and forth with them in some facets. So, even like a K-State, I mean, I there's just so many things where I think if they were to join a certain conference, it would help. My only biggest concern is if we join the Pac-12, those time frames, those time zones that we're going to be potentially playing in for like the games that we would be able to see. I know they might flex those out and stuff, but I don't want to stay up till 10 o'clock at night watching a game. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of back to just the rule of thumb. Like nothing really makes sense anymore in conference realignment. So like that, you're right. That doesn't totally make sense. And it's definitely not anybody's first choice, but you'll have to bite the bullet and do it because it's better. I mean, the difference, if you're going to make the Pac-12 payout right now is like 32, 33 mil per year per school. If you're going to make 33 mil per school versus like say 16, 17, 18, we're talking about a difference of 12, 13 million dollars a year between playing in an American Big 12 conglomerate versus the Pac-12. Look, I got 13 million reasons why everybody is going to stay up to watch those games. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Like money will talk there. And a lot of that goes back to like, where that money will hurt if you don't have it is how do you pay your coaches? Like, how can you be competitive with coaching salaries, whether it's head coaches or assistants and all of that stuff, like the extra support staff and all these things that people are paying out the wazoo right now for on their staffs. Like that's where you'll start to fall behind. And so like, nobody wants to see that. And if it's going to lead to more winning and better basketball and football, whatever, I think people will just wind up putting up with it. The other thing too, is like, if the Pac-12 does come into the central time zone, if that were to happen, that would at least open up some more time slots. And that's going to be a big part of the incentive for the Pac-12 because they want everybody else to be able to see their league too.
For sure. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. And I do want to talk a little bit K-State before I let you go. Football season is fastly approaching and, it's getting exciting. What are you most looking forward to this football season for the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think mainly just getting back out there and playing a game
Yeah.
because it's been a long off season. K-State's last win was October 24th, which was against Kansas. That seems like 3 lifetimes ago. And since then, they lost out. They not only lost games, but they were getting killed. They were getting blown out. It was not fun. They had the 69 points given up to Texas. They lost 45-0 to Iowa State. So it's just a long off season. Then they did not perform as well as I think fans had hoped on the recruiting trail. It's still been better than what Bill Snyder was doing, but it's not been quite taking that next step that they anticipated. So there's just been a lot of negativity. And then you throw realignment on top of it. Like there's just a lot of angst. And you have some optimism there, and everybody just wants to see them get back on the field. And the first game is exciting because it's in Arlington at Jerry World against Stanford. So you have a chance to make a statement there week 1. There's a lot of optimism for the offense. Skylar Thompson's back, 6th-year senior, injured in game 3 last year. That just killed the season. Deuce Vaughn is as good a running back and really just all-purpose players you'll find in college football, and just a coach's dream. Coach's son says and does all the right things. Great leader. Can't say enough good things about him. All the superlatives fit. They have a transfer tight end, Daniel Matterbebe. His brother Josh just got taken in the NFL drafts. Really talented. If he can stay healthy, that's always been his thing in college. That could be a huge weapon. Malik Knowles, also a guy that needs to stay healthy. He's a receiver. That's somebody else there. So like there's a lot of reason for optimism with the offense. The defense, there are a ton of holes. Lost their best player to the NFL. They don't really have any linebackers returning that you feel like are frontline linebackers in the Big 12 probably. They have a lot of good pieces in the secondary, including Julius Brents, who I would watch out for from Iowa, who's going to be an NFL corner. But do they have enough depth there, I think, is really the question, too, and they've overhauled it with some transfers. Difficult schedule, tricky non-con. They have Stanford, then they have Nevada, who's another – that's a very losable game in the non-con. And then the Big 12 schedule starts with Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Iowa State. So no favors from the Big 12 schedule makers there with how things start. So that'll dictate a lot of how the season goes. But I think my expectation 7-5, 8-4, something like that right now. And if they could get back to 8 wins, which is where they were at in Kleiman's first year, I think you'd feel great. Everybody would feel very good about that.
Yeah, I started thinking if schools like K-State, KU finds a miracle, if they were to beat the schools like Oklahoma and Texas who are leaving the conference, what kind of statement would that send? They're like, hey, I think that in all honesty, I think that's going to be some internal motivation. I think there's going to be some coaches that really rally the troops to go take on these guys. Like, hey, they wanted to leave us. We're going to show them going out. Do you think that's going to be something to look out for?
Well, I think that's where like the fans, that will matter a lot more to the fans than it will the players. I honestly, I'm sure the players see some of this, right? Like they're not immune to being on social media and seeing everybody riled up, but like they're much more, players are much more focused on like what's going on today, what's going on in my career. And I mean, right now, granted rights is still in place until 2025. Texas and Oklahoma are still saying the right things publicly for legal reasons. I think we all assume, but that they'll be here through 2025. So most of these kids that are actually on the field, doesn't really matter that much to them and their future, but like the fans, I mean, that's where the road environments that Texas and Oklahoma are going to walk into this year are just going to be insane. I mean, Oklahoma's coming to Manhattan, so K-State has a 2-game winning streak going against them, right? And we remember what happened the last time they were here in 2019. It's going to be that times, maybe not times 2, but times 1.5, perhaps, something like that, with the added juice from this year and them leaving the conference. Texas, I think especially, is going to get it everywhere they go on the road. But even if you think about Oklahoma, I mean, Robert Allen, you referenced that interview that was on my YouTube channel. I'm trying to remember what his direct quote was to Oklahoma players because they have to go to Stillwater for Bedlam this year. He was saying like, what, everybody on the sideline, make sure you bring a helmet and don't take it off. I mean, that's the kind of environment that you're going to get after they've left, and it may be for 4 years. We'll see how long all that goes. But yeah, I think the fans are going to be just tweaking on this stuff. I mean, it's going to be intense for the fans because they will want to win these games so very badly. We've seen what the vitriol has been like here over the last 3.5 weeks, but whether or not that does it for the players, I don't know. And even then, I think, look, they always get up for Texas and Oklahoma anyway, because Texas is Texas and Oklahoma is Oklahoma. So it will probably be about the same for the players, but maybe you get an extra edge and a little extra boost from the fan base. And the other thing I'll say too about winning those games, Gene Taylor told me the other day, it's a good year to have a good year, and kind of said that with a wry smile. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the point being there, everything helps. If you can go out and have an Iowa State year this year where you make a Big 12 championship game, that's not going to hurt. I mean, 10 years ago, again, to use that reference point, when we had realignment the first time, Iowa State wasn't getting a sniff from the Big Ten. Even if they're an AAU school, that wasn't happening. But Matt Campbell has changed the calculus on that with how much he's won here over the last few years. So, yes, it would definitely help. Definitely help if you could win some of those games. If K-State beats Oklahoma a third time in a row, that would not be a bad thing for their realignment future.
That'd be incredible. That'd be absolutely amazing to see for sure too. I think that would just fire people up. And, I think at some point, KU, K-State, people do kind of rival each other. But at this point, I think it's something you can almost come together with and really kind of root against, those types of teams that just uprooted us and see you later type of thing. But John, man, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you talking to me about, the conference realignment. As always, man, I'm listening to your stuff. It's great content. You really put in the time, put in the hard work. It's definitely noticeable. And I want to thank you for doing that also. Before I let you completely go, can you give everybody your socials one more time so they can find all your good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I appreciate the kind words, Lucas. Thanks for having me on anytime. YouTube channel is just my name, John Kurtz, Kurtz. You can find me on Twitter at JLKurtz, JLKurtz. If you want to listen to the daily radio show, wherever you get your podcasts, just search The Game, KMAN, Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. If you want just K-State specific stuff, it's the Lock It Up with Kurtz podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. That's on YouTube as well as all the podcast platforms too. So lots of ways to get in touch, find the content. DMs are open on Twitter, man. Hit me up if you have questions. And that's a good rundown there.
There it is. There it is. Well, you guys know how I wrap this up. I appreciate you checking out the Beat of KC. And as always, have a good day.